Okay, good evening, everybody who's joining our class to learn Bible. We're studying the book of Samuel, and yet another portion on our saga, our story of the prophet Samuel, King Saul, his son Jonathan, and of course, David. Now, we learned, if you recall, that David was secretly anointed by Samuel, but he is not publicizing it. And at the same time, he becomes the helper for King Saul. He pacifies him. He plays the instrument for him. But we discussed last week that turns out that this David is this great warrior. How is he a warrior? He fights Goliath. How does he fight Goliath? The answer is not with swords, not with shields, not with might, but with the Spirit of God. And through the Spirit of God, David is able to, in one shot, take down the greatest menace, the greatest enemy to the Jewish people at the time. The story concludes with Saul, who actually sent David, but then forgot or didn't know. Remember, Saul is kind of in a weakening emotional state of mind. In verse 58, he says, "Who is that son? Who is that young man? Who are you?" He says it to him. And David answers, "I am Ben Yishai Beit Halachmi. I'm the son of Yishai from Bethlehem." And that's how we end the chapter. And then the chapter 18 discusses the relationship that David had with Jonathan. Now, this relationship is depicted in the most unusual, extraordinary way possible. And we have to ask ourselves why. The Navi goes out of its way to spend many, many verses, starting with the first one, in describing the special kinship that David and Jonathan had. When David finished speaking with Saul, Jonathan's soul became bound up with the soul of David. Jonathan loved David as himself. In the Hebrew, it says, "Vayaveu Yehonatan kenafsho," his nefesh, his soul. It's if they were one soul. This is very lofty, beautiful terms and expressions, and it's meant to truly teach us of a unique relationship. A relationship that really transcended the types of relationships we think about. We think about relationships that are based on mutual interests. This was much higher. Relationships that is based on quid pro quo, like selfish, I'll do something for them, but then they'll do something for me. This is way beyond. And on a high, not one we will not might say the highest level is some kind of sexual intimate relationship. This even surpassed that, because that is a relationship between a man and a woman in the Bible is sacrosanct. It's very, very important. But the Navi here seems to say that this is on an even higher dimension. Let's see what happens. Saul took David into his service that day after he killed Goliath, and he wouldn't even let him go home to his father's house. And Jonathan makes a pact because Jonathan loved him as himself. Okay, it repeats itself and repeats itself. And in verse 4, he takes off his cloak and tunic that he was wearing, and he gives them to David, I guess a symbol of their love. And David goes out with the troops. So it's not just a symbol. He needed some army shields and warfare and tools, weapons. So Jonathan says you could have it all, even though he too was a fighter. But he gives it to David. David goes out and was successful in every mission that Saul sends him. And he's even put in command of all the soldiers. And not only that, but the Navi says that the soldiers love David as well. Okay, so you have this magnetic personality that David is, and we're going to be developing this understanding throughout the course of the class. David is someone who is charismatic, is some kind of remarkable warrior, but at the same time has a spiritual side, and an additional dimension he has this way of making people feel good. But, that's David, and now there's the rest of the world. So when the troops came back home and David returned from killing the Philistine, all the women would go out singing and dancing and greeting King Saul. But what did they sing? I remember that from many, many years ago. Saul had killed the thousands, but David, he kills by the tens of thousands. That already is going to drive a wedge of jealousy into King Saul, that this young boy who doesn't look like a warrior at all, who's not described that way, is not only matched to the power and success of King Saul, who is higher than everyone physically, stronger than everyone physically, but actually he surpasses him by 10 times. And right away in verse 8, Saul was very distressed, very angry and vexed. And he said, why does David get such accolades, tens of thousands? All that's left for him is the kingship. Which means that Saul kind of realized that David is acquiring too much power. He's loved by too many. And there's certainly fear that maybe he's going to take over. From that day on, Saul had a jealous eye on David. The next day, an evil spirit of God gripped Saul, and he began to rave in the house while David was playing the lyre, the harp, as he did daily. Saul had a spear in his hand and threw the spear, thinking to pin David to the wall to kill him. But David eluded him twice. Then Saul became afraid of David, for he realized that God was with David. So Saul, now when we say a spirit of God, an evil spirit of God, there was no other way in ancient times to interpret the actions of King Saul. On the one hand, when he was infused with a sense of charisma and excitement and joy and positivity, so we could say that that's a positive spirit of God. And when he was infused with the raging lunacy of wanting to murder, one of the great heroes, so they called it a spirit of God, a negative spirit of God. We might call it a psychosis. We might call it a sickness. We might call it sadism. Whatever it is, Saul, it's gripped by it, and apparently sometimes more and sometimes less. We might call him a split personality. We might call him manic depressive. Whatever psychiatrists want to diagnose King Saul, but that seems to be anachronistic to go and do that. Nevertheless, David sees that Saul wants to kill him. And Saul fears that he might not be able to. What does Saul do? He removes him from his presence. And he sends him into battle, deeper into the battle. Figuring I won't kill him. We'll let the Philistines do the job. Unfortunately, in verse 14, David is successful in all his undertakings, for God, the Lord, is with him. So the more successful David becomes, the more Saul is frightful of David and angry and vengeful and jealous. And it's a vicious cycle. all Israel and Judah love David, for he marches at the head. Saul stays in the kingdom, in the castle, and David is out in battle and he's defeating everyone. Now remember that when he defeated Philistine, his reward was supposed to be Saul's daughter. So he had said, verse 17, here is my older daughter Meirav, I will give her to you in marriage. In return, you will be my warrior and fight the battles of the Lord. And Saul thought, well, I'll let the Philistine strike him down. Now, this seems to be a little strange because Saul had already promised that his daughter would become the wife of King David. But Saul had several daughters. So perhaps it was referring to a different one. David replied to Saul, who am I? I'm not worthy. David remains humble most of his life as a king. But verse 19 is a strange turn of events. At the same time that Meirav, daughter of Saul, should have been given to David, she was given in marriage to Adriel the Mecholite. So the commentaries try to figure out what happened. Did Saul kind of pull a fast one? Did Meirav marry on her own? This is a debate in the Talmud. But it doesn't make a difference because in verse 20, Michal, Saul, the second daughter of Saul, fell in love with David. And she wanted to marry him. And Saul was happy, figuring that David will go into battle and surely be killed by the Philistines. But because it didn't fit into what was supposed to be the deal, so Saul figures he's going to add some conditions to this marriage. And he says, I will not give you my daughter unless you will give me 100 foreskins. Of the Philistines. 100 foreskins. In other words, kill 100 Philistines and, chop them off and bring them to me. In other words, basically, you want my daughter, then show me that you're worthy of it. David rose up to the challenge and brought the Philistines and certainly received Michal as a wife. And in verse 28, Shaul realized that the Lord was with David and that Michal, daughter of Saul, loved him. He still grew more afraid of David, and he was David's enemy from that point on. And David's reputation continues to soar. Okay, so we have here a situation where the Navi wants to go and teach us that one star is rising and the other one is falling, and they're intimately connected, not only because he fights for him, and not only because he works for him, but now he's the son-in-law. And by the way, he's also the closest relationship that one can have with his son. So David is intensely, intimately connected with all of Saul's family, while at the same time Saul is frightened of him and is jealous of him and wants to kill him. What a strange web that has been woven. In chapter 19, Saul continues to tell everyone, including his son Jonathan, that we have to kill David. But Jonathan was a big supporter of David. He was very fond of him. And of course, Jonathan told David that my father wants to kill you, so you better be careful, and you better go hide. And I'll kind of go out and feel my father out and see, you get the feeling that there were certain days that the father was his old self and really was in need of David to comfort him and was okay. And then other times he flew off the handle. So Yonatan wants to try to figure out, which day is this? What is King Saul feeling right now? And he goes and tells David, you wait and let me try to feel him out. And Jonathan spoke well of David in verse 4 to his father, and he said, David never wronged you. His actions are in your favor. He took his life into his hands to kill the Philistine. You were happy. Don't you remember? You shouldn't be, he shouldn't incur the guilt of shedding the blood. You shouldn't incur the guilt, you shouldn't shed his blood. And he listens to his son, but remember, he's in this position. He's going to change his mind all the time. But right now, he says, you know something, you're right. What have I been thinking? As the Lord lives, he swore, I will not put him to death. Well, Jonathan calls David and says, you can come back to Saul. Don't worry, he made a shvuah, he made an oath that he's not going to kill you. And the circle goes once again, and there's another battle with the Philistines, and David goes out, and they all run away from him, and the evil spirit comes back to Saul, while David is sitting there playing the lyre, the instrument to soothe him. Saul takes his spear and tries to kill David once again. Obviously, David gets the message, and he runs away. And then he sends messengers to, he runs to his house, and the king's messengers are coming to kill David. So what does Michal, his wife, do? She tells him, unless you run for your life tonight, you will be killed tomorrow. So she lets him down from the window, and he escapes, and he flees away from his home. And she even took a household idol, which is a whole other question, but she put it in the bed and acted like David was still there, and says he was sick. When the messenger came, they found, they'd been tricked. And Saul said to Michal, why'd you play this trick on me and let my enemy get away safely? Now he's speaking about his daughter's husband. So Michal said, he said he's going to kill me if I don't help him. Now, Michal is in a strange position. On the one hand, she loves David. On the other hand, she fears and respects and loves, I don't know, but certainly fears her father. So she's put in this very, very awkward position. And she chooses to save David's life. And for that, we should certainly recognize that the valuable role she plays. David runs away. Where does David run? He runs to Shmuel. Remember Shmuel? Samuel, he's been silent. He's been very quiet this whole time. Where has he been? The answer, I think, is that he's been old. And, when you get too old, you don't have the power, you don't have the influence, and you don't have the clarity. And I think that's what old age does. It takes away not only your strength, but also your clear-mindedness. So he's not involved. He doesn't go and remonstrate and yell at Saul, and he doesn't make things right. Stays out of the picture until David knocks on his door in the middle of the night and says, Saul's been trying to kill me. And he probably said, remember you anointed me as the king? I've been quiet about it, but this is ridiculous. I'm getting killed, attempted every other day. Shmuel doesn't say a word. I don't know what to make of this. Shmuel's silence. Okay? I was learning it with Tchela today, my daughter, and she suggested that Shmuel was a bit ambivalent about David. Who was Shmuel's guy? Saul. He developed him. He was his mentor. He strengthened him. He cultivated. He And then Saul kind of let him down. So another one, God says, oh, now choose David. And Shmuel is kind of, I don't know, he's not fully supportive. Interesting theory, Techelet. But what he even though he's silent, he does save King David. He saves him. He says, "Let's go to." He takes him to Nayot, right? A city or an area next to where they were living. Shaul finds out. Shaul sends his henchmen, his guards, to go and kill David, or at least to bring him back to the. And then something strange happens. Okay, what is in Nayot? A congregation of prophets. Okay, apparently there were schools of prophecy, and when they would get together, okay, they would prophesy, and there would be I guess maybe in a trance, okay, and maybe they would have a different type of complexion, different type of feeling. So Shmuel, some extraordinary measures, he brings David to this place. And anyone who comes in contact with this place falls into the trance of the Spirit of God. And therefore the messengers entranced. So 21, Saul says, additional messengers or guards or police or whatever, and they become entranced. And then finally Saul himself comes and says, where are Samuel and David? They show him, they say he's in Nayot. So he goes to Nayot and he himself becomes part of that trance to the point where in verse 24, he disrobes. Strange. Disrobes and he starts to prophesy and he's standing there naked all day and all night, to which people started saying, maybe in a derisive way, is Saul also a prophet? Hagam Shaul Banevim? This is a modern day Israeli expression. I think it means like, this is incredulous. This is hard to believe. Is Saul now all of a sudden a prophet? While Saul is doing this, David escapes. Now, by the way, this is all we hear of about what Samuel does for David. I don't know. He saves him in a strange type of way. But then he kind of gets out of the picture. And as I said, perhaps it's no longer Samuel's time, and David has to look elsewhere for solace. He comes, he leaves Nayot, and he comes back to Jonathan. And he says, what have I done wrong? What's my crime? What have I done to your father? He's trying to understand what's the cause of all this. And Jonathan says, don't worry, you will not die. My father will tell me always what he's going to do, so you can stay. You can stay around, and I'll let you know moments before. And I swear and take God's name. This once again reminds us of the relationship that David and Jonathan had. Jonathan has this dual loyalty, okay? Because he's very loyal, and you'll see later on, he's very loyal to his father. But at the same time, he is very loyal to King David, to David, and he's trying to juggle between the two. Okay. And then in this chapter, in chapter 20, there's a whole kind of process how they go about trying to find out if Saul still wants to kill David, and how David can get the message from Jonathan. And they come up with a plan that they're going to go into the field. And on the third day, Jonathan promises that he'll let David know. And he says, listen, tomorrow is Rosh Chodesh. And on Rosh Chodesh, everyone comes to the table, the king's table. And you won't be there because obviously if you go there, you might be killed. So when my father asks me what's going on, I will, where's David? Then I'll broach the topic and then we'll discuss it. And I'll see if he still has it out for you. And here's what I'll do, he says. I will, I'll take my arms bearer and with the arrows, and I'll shoot, because they used to practice, right? So I'll shoot three arrows to a certain target. And if I have good news for you, then the arrows will be before the target. And if I have bad news for you, then the arrows will be after the target. And they basically come up with some plan so that nobody knows but David, who's watching from a certain vantage point, what the news is. The next day, which was Rosh Chodesh, Jonathan sits at the table and Saul actually doesn't speak anything about it, which is shocking. He didn't understand. Usually he mentions it. But the following day, the day after the second month of Rosh Chodesh, which, by the way, today is the day after the second month, Rosh Chodesh, today in our calendar. So many years ago, according to this. Saul says to Jonathan, why didn't David come today? And why didn't David come yesterday to eat? And Jonathan said, he had to go back to Beit Lechem. I let him go because he had family issues to take care of. And then, verse 30, Saul gets angry. And he said, and he speaks to Jonathan, you are traitorous because you have chosen David over me. And that's an embarrassment to you and to your family. And you should know that as long as David is alive, it's not safe for me to be king. And that means you're not going to be king. Jonathan says, why should he be killed? What has he done? Right? Same trope, same idea. And then the unthinkable happens. Saul takes his spear and he throws it at Jonathan to kill him. The Navi says to kill him. I wonder if it's to frighten him, or I wonder if it's to make a point. Well, the point was made. Once Jonathan sees that his father is ready to self-destruct, to destroy his own family because he's enraged and deranged over his desire to kill David, then in verse 33, Jonathan understands it's over. My father has only one thing on his mind, and he has no clear thought. And Jonathan gets up, and he didn't even eat with his father, and he went out to the field. He took his arms bearer, and he took his arrows, and he shot them way in the distance. And David understood the message, but not only that, he sent away his arms bearer, and there's a final conversation, and I believe it's the last conversation that David and Jonathan will have, because it means that David has to leave his wife, leave his family, leave the comfort of, the king's castle, and go into exile, because Saul is going to chase him down. And that's unfortunately the next chapters of Saul, forgetting about the community, forgetting about his people, the nation, forgetting about everything, and just focusing on killing David. Verse 41, when the boy got there, left, David emerged from his concealment. He threw himself face down on the ground and bowed 3 times before Jonathan. They kissed each other and wept together. And David wept even longer. And Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, for the two have sworn to each other in the name of the Lord. May God witness between you and me, and between your offspring and mine, forever, that we will have peace and love, but during a time that will be very difficult for you and for us to be able to be in touch and see each other." So this ends our chapter 20, and we will wait another week to find out what happens in the saga. Will Saul finally get David? Will he kill him? Which I imagine you know the answer to, but we will wait to find out. Everybody have a wonderful week, and peace and health.